Hey friend, in my previous video, I explained what rolling updates for SQL Server availability groups are and covered how Ansible can be used to transform this complex, manual, tedious process into a streamlined, repeatable operation. Now we're going to dive in deeper into the foundation of any Ansible automation, and that's the inventory file. Everything starts with the inventory file because Ansible needs to know which host it's going to be working with and how to connect to those hosts. If you're completely new to Ansible, stick around to the end. I have a couple of free resources you can swipe to get started. Those resources will take you through understanding core concepts of around Ansible and also show you how to set up a control node using Windows Subsystem for Linux, and then build out a couple of playbooks to get started and get familiar with just how easy Ansible is to use. The second resource will describe variable precedents and the many different ways you can use variables inside of an Ansible playbook or role. Again, this is the second video in the AG Patching with Ansible series. If you missed the last one, be sure to check it out first. But let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to answer 10 different questions. What is the primary purpose of an Ansible inventory file? 2, what are the two main formats supported by Ansible for inventory files? 3, in the context of SQL Server AG patching with Ansible, why is it important to define variables? 4, describe the inventory file host and group vars directly, a method for defining variables. And 5, what is the key advantage of using the host vars directory for defining variables? Although we won't be using the host vars and group vars directories, it's important for you to understand your options of when it comes to Ansible in variable management. 6, when would you typically use the group vars directory for variable definition? And number 7 is, what is the purpose of role defaults in an Ansible role? 8, how does the precedence of role vars compare to role defaults? And 9, why did I choose to use inventory file variables for the example in this blog series? I'll go ahead and answer that one real quick for simplicity and to keep basically to keep myself from going down rabbit holes. And step 10, or question 10, is what Ansible feature is recommended for handling sensitive information like passwords? Hint, it's definitely not the plain text inventory file. Understanding Ansible inventory basics. So the definition is, and Ansible, don't worry, I'm not going to read these word for word, but it's important for you to understand. The definition, it's simply a list of managed hosts, your Windows servers hosting SQL servers, for example, and the groups they belong to. So variables can be assigned to hosts specifically, and they can also be assigned to groups that's defined in the inventory file. Their function is basically like an address book. Think of it as an address book that has multiple pieces of information about that specific host. It tells Ansible where to connect and what method to use to connect. So you can use WinRM or SSH, and then what kind of the infrastructure it's working with. So Ansible can not only work with servers, it can work with network switches and all sorts of different devices. So it needs to know and understand how to work with the infrastructure for your specific use case. There are two main formats of inventory files in Ansible. Those are INI files and YAML files. For simplicity, we're going to focus on the INI format. Basically, an INI inventory would list our SQL AG replicas, their instances, in a group, and you'll see this in just a second, called SQL servers. And then there's some variables that's defined for the group that apply to all of our hosts. So in our case, there's going to be 4 hosts, and those are all Windows machines. We're going to connect to them using WinRM. So instead of defining our WinRM connection properties for each host, since they're all the same, then we can apply we can just set those in the group vars section. When it comes to Ansible and variables, you have a lot of options of where you can place those variables. So one of those options is in the inventory file, and that's what we're going to use. you've got different ones. You've got host and group vars. So you'll see in a second, we do have some variables defined for each individual host, such as the SQL Server instance name. And then, like I was saying, the WinRM connection variables are all defined in the group vars. So you also have a host vars directory, and that directory would be, you could create it in the same location as the inventory file, and Ansible knows to go into that directory and look for any YAML files that have the name that are that were created using the name of the host that's in your inventory. So in my case, if we have SQL1.sandbox.local as a host, then Ansible would go into that directory, the host vars directory, look for a file called SQL1.sandbox.local.yaml or .yml, and know that those are the variables that's going to apply to that specific host. There's also another directory that can be created for group vars. So that's similar, very similar to the host vars, but it's going to be named the same as the group. So SQL servers.yaml in our case. Reduces repetition across multiple hosts. So if you've got one that's, for instance, if you know that all of your instances run on port 1433, then you could define that SQL port down in the groups. But if you have some that runs on different ports, you'd want to define that in your host vars directory or in the inventory file to keep things simple. There are also role defaults and variables that can be defined for the role. Don't worry if you're not familiar with roles in Ansible just yet. That is covered in the document I was telling you about, the free guide. That's one of the core concepts. But defaults and variables can be defined at the role level. They're easily overwritten, though, or overridden by different places where you can define the variables, and that's covered in the variable precedence. So it's a very important concept to understand as you work with Ansible. We're going to keep things pretty simple in this scenario. So this is a typical inventory file. This is actually the inventory file that we're going to be using for our for this set of videos. You can see that we have SQL servers defined. That's our group. And then SQL 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all of our replicas as part of this AG. The SQL instance name is defined at the host level. So the first three have they're all using the default instance, and they all use the same SQL port. But if I knew that SQL 1 ran on port, let's say 1536 or something like that, then I could easily change it here in the inventory file. You'll notice that SQL 4 is a named instance, inst A, but I do have it assigned to run on 1433. And then the second section here is SQL servers and then :vars. This is where we define all of our variables for our SQL servers group. So we've got Ansible connection. We're going to use WinRM with Windows Server 2025. In some other videos, I've shown how to use SSH instead of WinRM. It's actually a little bit easier to work with. And then we're going to, since this is a demo environment or a test environment, we're going to go ahead and ignore cert validation. And we're going to connect on WinRM port 5986. We're going to use Kerberos as the transport method. We're going to enable Kerberos delegation. And then the operation timeout is going to be set to 60 seconds. WinRM read timeout 60 seconds, so on. And then down at the bottom, since all of these hosts are going to be using the same AG, I've only got one AG defined across these. So the AG name that we're going to be using as part of the example is sandbox AG. Since that's the same AG across all four, then we can define it down in our group section, our group variables. Now we're going to jump over into the demo environment, and I'll show you real quick what we have set up, and then we're going to take a look at variable inspection in demo. We can use these commands here to one, view all host variables with a single command. We can do that. We can specify. We can use a command called Ansible-inventory on our control node. dash dash host, and we're just going to use SQL 1 as the example. And then the output is actually going to be in YAML format. But first, before we get started on that, this is the environment we're going to be using. All 4 of these replicas or instances are SQL Server 2022 Developer Edition, and I have one AG set up on all 4, and that's called the Sandbox AG that we just saw a second ago. It only has one database right now inside that AG, and it's called AG Test. This is not a contained AG. It's just your standard availability group that you could set up in Enterprise. This is what you're going to be more accustomed to, I believe. And let's go ahead and jump back over. I've just got Visual Studio Code I'm running, and I've connected to my Windows subsystem for Linux environment. And there I've already got it set up as a control node. Of course, we're not going to cover setting up Ansible in this series. I have other videos where you can do that, or just grab the guide. So let's go ahead and run Ansible-inventory. -I, my inventory file name, and you see it here. It's called host.ini. So we're going to say -i and then provide the host.ini. And what was that next? -host. SQL1.sandbox.local, and our output is going to be YAML. So we can see here, these are all the variables that are applied to this specific host. So it includes the host level variables that are defined in the inventory file, and also the group level variables. We can see at the group level, we have AG name, all of our WinRM connection settings, and then at the bottom, we can see we have 2 variables that were assigned at the host level. So this is a quick and easy way to make sure that once you're defining your inventory file, to make sure that it is getting all of the variables assigned to that specific host that you intend to be assigned to it. The next one, it's a little bit different output. It's going to list all variables for a group with this command. Let's go ahead and run that one. We can see this includes everything that's in that SQL Servers group. So if we had 20 hosts in there, then it would output all 20 hosts and show us not only the group variables, but also the host variables, just like the other command. Next, we're going to take a look at the visual representation. So we're going to output this into a graph. Don't forget your inventory file, and then -graph. So here we can just see our SQL servers. It's not giving us the variables, but it is showing us everything, or all the hosts that's defined in the SQL servers group. There are no hosts that don't belong to a group, so that's why you see ungrouped. And if we had, let's say we had web servers defined as a group inside the same inventory file, maybe you're building a playbook that will not only patch your SQL servers, but it will also go and on your web servers put up a maintenance page. Ansible can do that, can do everything in the same playbook or role, or in that part of that workflow. But it would be defined here as web servers, and then web 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So you get the general idea. The Ansible inventory is a good command to work with. Do some examples inside your own environment. Just get familiar with how to use it, so you can confirm that all of your variables have been defined correctly, and it's doing what you expect it to do. There's one more, Ansible inventory -list. I believe that's just going to export it into a list format versus the graph that we just saw here. Yeah, it's more of a JSON list. The advantages of direct inventory variables. So one is visibility. Everything is in one place. You're not going and looking through the host vars and looking through each file that's specific to those hosts. So it does make that easy to see those relationships at a glance. And it helps with troubleshooting or onboarding new team members. In your case, you're probably onboarding new database engineers or database administrators, and you kind of want to show them your inventory file. It does simplify that. Quick setup, so they're easy to understand for smaller environments, allowing you to get started with automation faster without those complex directory, group var, and host var structures. But while these advantages make direct inventory variables appealing for demonstrations and smaller environments, it's important to consider scalability as your automation grows in complexity and scope. So if you have 100 hosts defined in your inventory file, then it's going to kind of start getting ugly, and you may want to look at some of using the host vars and group vars variables. Some of the limitations of direct inventory variables is it becomes unwieldy, becomes difficult to manage as your variable count increases, and also it clutters that inventory file pretty quickly. Limited structure, so limited as far as complex data types like lists and dictionaries. You may not be able to define in that inventory file, and you want to go ahead and put those in the host vars and group vars. This is more advanced Ansible things that you'll get into as you build out your automation, but it could, if you try to do everything in that inventory file, it's going to restrict your ability to organize that related data. And it doesn't scale well as far as putting everything in the inventory file. Not ideal for larger environments with many hosts, as the file becomes difficult to navigate and maintain. So it's just going to get cluttered up. But if you've only got a small set of SQL servers that you're working with, it may be the ideal place just to keep everything in one location. Role defaults for SQL Server patching. So as we get into defining our role, there's some defaults that we're going to set for that role, such as setting or such as failing over to the primary. If we want to do that, we can enable it there as a default, or you could just leave that set to false if you don't want to fail back. Reboots, and then also the location of the patch file. Those are some of the defaults that we're going to set as part of our role that we build. And also the file checksum for validation. So we're going to make sure that the checksum that we place in our default is the checksum that Ansible can generate whenever it reviews that exe or that patch exe. Installation parameters. So if you've ever installed a SQL Server patch using the command line, you know that there's several different parameters you can pass to that exe for silent installation. Instance targeting. So you can either specify to patch all instances on a host, or you can say only patch our specific instance. In our case, that's what we're going to do. And then also, of course, accept the license. Operational controls. We just already talked about failback configuration, module management. So we're going to be leveraging the SQL Server PowerShell module. And in that case, if it doesn't already exist on our host, we're going to copy that over. And we can we can specify if we want to remove that module once we're finished or just leave it in place. It's also going to reboot servers by default. We can turn that off if we don't want to restart those servers. And then version validation, we're going to have a default of a desired SQL build. And there's where we'll change it to specify this is the build of SQL Server that we want to make sure that's in place once we finish patching. So those are all role defaults. Provides a great place or great starting point that work out of the box. So if you take this role and you give it to another team, then if those defaults are set, those are correctly, those are something that they may not have to change. And it makes the role self-contained and reusable across multiple environments. So handling sensitive information, I did want to touch on this. You may be in a situation of where you're using another role, and I teach this in the level 1 course, Ansible for SQL Server DBA's level 1 course. In it, we go through of how to install and configure over 60, I think it's over 60 different tasks whenever you're deploying SQL Server using Ansible. So one of those tasks is setting up the service account and handling credentials like the SA password and things. You don't want to put that into an INI or YAML file because that is just open text that anybody could read. And then if you, let's say you put your role into source control, and that includes your inventory files into source control, then you would have all of your passwords in open text, and you don't want that. For that case, Ansible provides Ansible Vault. It's all part of Ansible that you get for free whenever you install Ansible. So you can use it to encrypt those values, and then Ansible can use those values instead of storing that information, that sensitive information, in an INI or YAML file, an inventory file. So don't do that. Look into using Ansible Vault for that. And I have a few blog posts out on automatesql.com that you can go in and read more about Ansible Vault. Our next steps in the SQL Server AG patching, the next video will actually take you through how to set up your role directory structure, and we'll use an Ansible command to do that for us, simplify that. Be sure to check that out whenever it's up. But the next step as far as AG patching is to validate patch integrity. I know some of this we've already talked about in the previous video. It's going to identify replicas, determine which is the primary and secondary replica roles. It's going to manage failover. It's going to execute the updates, and then it's going to do that post validation. That's what we're going to be building. And then with the inventory file defined, which is the foundation for our patch automation, you're in a good state to start building out the role, which we'll get into next in the next video. So again, the free resources for getting started, if you're completely new to Ansible and you want to learn more about setting up that Ansible control node and maybe building some test playbooks and just getting familiar with how Ansible connects to Windows, it's all covered in that SQL Server Automation, Your First Steps with Ansible guide. If you go out to any of my blog posts, you'll see the form at the bottom. And then also, I'll also put a link down in the description. Additionally, as part of that, when you sign up or request that download, I'll also send you the Ansible Variable Precedence, the complete guide. It's a guide that I put together for myself just so that I can kind of remember whenever I'm setting a variable in Ansible, it could be overwritten somewhere else. So that just keeps me on track as I'm working through and defining new roles. So be sure to get that. And thanks again. If you like this content, go ahead and be sure to subscribe so that you'll get notified whenever I do release the next one in this series. And then if you have any feedback or anything else that you would like to see between Ansible and SQL Server or Ansible and Windows environments, drop those comments down in the bottom too. That just helps me come up with additional ideas for the content and helps a lot. So thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.